there's a couple of factors that are in play here, and we'll explain those, but drifting to the west, so towards the Sunshine State, towards waterlogged areas like Miami, Jacksonville could see a healthy amount of rain from this. This is slowly going to develop over the next few days, and one of the factors in play here is high pressure, which is going to, lead to some really intense heat in the Northeast and New England. We'll get to that in a minute, but this is also going to help direct this disturbance towards Florida. It's going to slide underneath this high pressure, and it's kind of going to get stuck where it can't go farther north. Instead, it has to go to the north and to the northwest. So that high pressure is going to steer it towards, unfortunately, the Sunshine State, where we saw a lot of rain last week, and we can see more rain towards the later half of this upcoming week. Now, this is the chance of seeing a tropical depression. I want to take a minute and explain this for a minute, because it's a lot of colors on this map. Where you see these green colors, that's about a 30 to 40% chance of development of seeing a tropical depression. But, if it gets stronger than that, it becomes a tropical storm, it gets a name, the impacts are still going to remain the same, and that is going to be extremely heavy rain. I think this forecast definitely warrants watching, because we're working in an environment where we did have some stronger shear that was, sitting right about there for the past week or so. That shear is starting to erode a little bit, and we know that we have extremely warm waters for this to tap into. So this is the European model, and it's showing a pretty impressive area to spend by the time we get to around Thursday and even into Friday, as this is tracking closer to the Sunshine State, Jacksonville, and even South Georgia, bringing some of that tropical moisture towards you. The model's still trying to get a handle on exactly how much rain, but we know, Lynette, that in this environment where we already have saturated ground, flash flooding is something that's almost a guarantee by week's end.
Exactly. And so you're talking about Florida. We have the Gulf Coast states. We're watching something there as well. More rain.
Outer edges of this tropical moisture that Lynette was just talking about for the Texas area over towards Biloxi and maybe Mobile. We'll get there in a minute. I want to focus on where the heaviest rain is going to be falling, and that is around Houston, around Galveston, perhaps up towards Conroe and Liberty, along the I-10 corridor, Beaumont. All of these areas are super saturated. Think back to early May. So we're just over a month ago. We had a lot of flooding in the Houston area from rounds and rounds of rain. We haven't had that much time to actually recover from that. The ground is still saturated, and now we're bringing in heavy tropical moisture. Today, good to go in Houston. Tomorrow, you'll see scattered showers in typical summertime fashion. Tuesday, we start to see this tropical influx of moisture that keeps us in the rain pretty much throughout the day, and it doesn't stop as we get into Wednesday morning. Lynette talked about some of the differences between the models, and we're still seeing some big differences, but both are signaling heavier rain. The American model is just signaling a lot different picture, and this would put us into the zone where we could see some very impactful flash flooding that would really throw a wrench in some of your week plans. So we're talking towards the later half of the week when these totals really start to add up. New Orleans, you're going to see some thunderstorms today, unfortunately, for Father's Day. Some of those outdoor plans might have to go indoors in the New Orleans area. And I'm concerned about New Orleans because, we see a typical afternoon thunderstorm, several rounds of it, and you can see flooding in New Orleans. We're going to see more rain on Monday, more tropical moisture streaming in. But while all of the really intense tropical moisture is directed more at Texas and over towards Lake Charles, New Orleans, we got to watch this forecast very closely, because we see any kind of shift to the east with some of this tropical moisture streaming in, and New Orleans, you'd be right back in some of the heavy rain and potential flash flooding. Right now, the European model is saying 2 to 3 inches of rain. The American model is saying a little bit more, but they're pretty much in agreement at this point. They're not in agreement in a place like Lake Charles, where, yes, we're expecting some heavy rain. The I-10 corridor is going to be frankly, a miserable place to drive this week with all these rounds of tropical moisture streaming in. Make sure your windshield wipers are working very well before you take a drive on I-10 this week. And you're going to have to give yourself lots of extra time, anywhere from 1 to 2. But I think that's on the lower end. I think, I'm in more agreement with the American model right now that we're more in the range of 3 to 5 inches of rain in Lake Charles, especially if we see repeated rounds of thunderstorms.
Yeah, the GFS.
So we're expecting more severe weather today, tomorrow, into Tuesday, and this is going to be over the same areas again and again. This is what Lynette was talking about, the ridge riders. So you have this ridge of high pressure, and it builds in. You have the jet stream that's farther to the north, and right along that jet stream is where you'll find the track of storms. Because we're stuck in this pattern for the next couple of days, the better part of the upcoming week, we're going to be stuck in the same storm pattern for the upcoming week, where we see repeated rounds of severe weather over the same areas. And by week's end, of course, we're going to have to talk about flash flooding too. So let's get the timing on this, because we will have some thunderstorms in the Duluth area, Chicago. Father's Day plans outside. Maybe you're taking dad to dinner. If you're, having to run in and out of a restaurant, make sure you have the umbrella for dad as we celebrate all the great dads out there on this Father's Day. But we turn our attention to Monday, and we're still talking about rain over many of the same areas, and a big complex that forms in South Dakota, which is not uncommon in the plains this time of year to see these complexes form overnight and then blast through areas like Minneapolis over to Duluth, maybe even Wisconsin by the time we get to early Monday morning, likely waking you up and dropping a lot of heavy rain that could flood some areas for your Monday morning commute. It doesn't stop there. We get to Tuesday. We're looking at more rain once again for storm-weary Minnesota down through Nebraska and parts of Kansas, even Kansas City seeing a few storms. Now we could see, 3 to 5 inches of rain. This is, at least through Wednesday. But I think more broad brush, we're talking 1 to 2, 2 to 3. But because we're saturated, Lynette, that's enough to cause flooding.
Sure is. Pesky mosquitoes, some of which carry harmful diseases. Cases of dengue fever have doubled this year in Florida.
Our partners with CBS News have more from Miami, where most of the cases are being reported. Feeling the forecast in Misery Bay, Michigan. You might be sad if you had some outside plans, maybe in the UP of Michigan for Father's Day, but it's just hit or miss storms, so the whole day won't be a washout, and you can make some great core memories with dad. Monday looks like a great day to stay inside, but if you're headed out, make sure you bring the rain gear. Meanwhile, in depressed Lake California, it is all about the sun and some very comfortable afternoons. Not much to be sad about when it comes to this forecast. And oh look, I think there's sadness now. Sadness, isn't this a great couple of days in depressed Lake? No, you're still feeling sad? That's all right. Sadness and Inside Out taught us that feeling sad is okay, and acknowledging that is an important part of our well-being. After all, sadness was the hero of the first Inside Out. And sometimes if you're feeling sad, taking some time outside in nature can go a long way. And this is a beautiful area to do that. And this is an absolutely beautiful forecast. And you and the family can get in with all the feels and all the emotions at Inside Out 2 in theaters right now. Hey, anger, I wouldn't pull that. Oh no. Clean up in Studio 9. Storms around the area, so it wasn't all, beautiful storms like that. It's 1:30. Weekend Recharge rolls on. I'm Molly McCollum.
And I'm Lynette Charles. And the weekend depends on the weather. We're going to continue to watch what's been going on for today. I do want to give a shout out to Paul Goodlow. He's enjoying his Father's Day off. It's well deserved. But we know that June is for dads. This is also the start of hurricane season. And right on cue, we actually do have development out there. We're watching 2 areas.
We have 2 areas. So we went from nothing at all, being very quiet, to things picking up very quickly, which is classic with the kind of to show you where we're watching these areas. So there's 1, there's 2. That's the Atlantic Basin. We also have a 3rd area that we're watching. That is for the East Pacific. I want to focus on the Atlantic Basin because that's going to have the biggest impacts to us here in the lower 48 for the upcoming weeks, starting in the Gulf. And we have a 60% chance of development over the next 7 days. Yesterday, that was lower. So we're looking at an environment that is becoming more favorable for development, and that would push heavy rain into Texas. We'll get to that forecast in just a minute. But I also want to show you the newest area that we're watching. This is near the Bahamas with a 30% chance of development also over the next 7 days as it moves towards the Sunshine State. And we're talking waterlogged areas that saw more than enough rain last week, and we could be putting more rain on top of that. I want to show you 2 different models because we are seeing some different solutions as far as the rainfall amounts from some of these. But I also want to show you the low-level spin and how these might develop. So we have the 2 areas that we're watching. There's the first one. This is the one that is in the Gulf, and it has this broad area of spin. It doesn't seem to be getting its act together as quickly as you look over towards this area, the second area, I should say, over towards the Bahamas. And that looks like it's trying to spin up and become a little bit more organized than this area in the Gulf. That is, if you were to believe the European model. The timing takes us into Jacksonville by Thursday. Meanwhile, this area area in the Gulf is now directing more of the moisture towards northern Mexico and away from areas, but that has already brought rain into Texas. Let's look at the American model now, because the timing is similar, but we are seeing some differences. Now, the American model is a little bit more impressed with some of this spin in the Gulf. It's also spinning up this area over towards the Bahamas, and the timing for you in Texas would be Tuesday into Wednesday, maybe even lingering to Thursday. Meanwhile, then we have to turn our attention to this area around the Florida, around Jacksonville area and around Florida, and that would bring heavy rain into Jacksonville, South Georgia, and potentially over even towards the panhandle of Florida, depending on how far south that tracks. Still a lot of details to work out with this forecast, and still a lot of things that can change from now to the end of the week. But Lynette, what we do know is that things are picking up pretty quickly activity-wise in the Atlantic Basin.
Yeah, they sure are. And we still
concerning number of tornadoes this season. More than 500 have been spotted in the U.S. just since April.
And there's new evidence that Tornado Alley may be expanding beyond the Midwest. CBS News national correspondent Dave Malkoff shows us why. Well, we're still seeing, across the middle of the nation, the tornadoes happening, but that trend is going down. So basically what you're seeing here in the yellow, the trend's going down, and east of the Mississippi, the trend's going up.
And the big trend when you see, east of the Mississippi is that a lot of these tornadoes are happening after dark. And that's a big problem.
That is a big problem. Let's talk about in terms of since 2010. So we look at 2011. That was that big tornado outbreak. And so we're second to that this year.
Just this year.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're not done with this year.
Yes, that's disturbing.
It is. And the numbers keep climbing in a lot of states like Texas. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the size of the state of Texas, why you have so many tornado reports. But it's also been an active year. But you go over towards Nebraska, we're close to 100 tornado reports. Places like Iowa and Missouri and over towards the Ohio Valley, it has been an incredibly devastating year for tornadoes and severe weather.
Yeah, and you look at the records that we set in Ohio and also places like West Virginia. So it just goes to show you, again, how far north, how far east that it is going.
These are the tornado reports for both April and May. You see how many of those dates of the month were either above average or even well above average. We saw way too many of those days.
Exactly. And so now we're in June, and we can see on the 5th of this month, that's when we've been dealing with the most those reports well above. But again, we still have a lot to go left.
We do, and the pattern remains very active for many of these very same areas. Well, more weekend recharge is coming your way. Temperatures are soaring on happy ending for both of them. Now, if you are looking for a happy forecast for your Father's Day, you're going to find a lot of heat. Now, if Dad likes the heat, that's good, but in a lot of places, it's going to be difficult to spend a lot of time outside. If you're going to the beach along the Gulf Coast, watch out for a few storms in that typical summer afternoon fashion. Atlanta hot, 95, Shreveport 97, Chicago even 93. We're going to be even hotter tomorrow, and the heat will start to build to the north as we go throughout the week. So if you're at a place where it's too hot to get outside in those peak heating hours of the day, maybe just let Dad take a nap, or as my dad likes to call it, checking his eyelids for cracks. That's always what he called it when we were growing up. He's like, no, I'm checking my eyelids for cracks. I'm not taking a nap. We've got a great forecast for traveling today. Now, we could run into a few thunderstorms, maybe towards the Orlando area, but as a whole, I don't think we're going to see too many delays at many of our major arteries airport-wise, so you should be able to fly with pretty good ease and not too many delays when it comes to weather-related delays. Now let's head to Boston and Fenway Park, where we've got a great rivalry game today. We've got the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. This is fantastic weather. I mean, you really couldn't ask for better baseball weather. First pitch is at 7. We're going to be in the 60s, not a lot of wind, probably a beautiful sunset. So, Lynette, 2 thumbs up for this Father's Day forecast here in Fenway Park.
All right, Molly, thank you.
And welcome into Weekend Recharge. I'm meteorologist Molly McCollum.
And I'm meteorologist Lynette Charles. And America's Father's Day weekend depends on the weather, I should say. I want to say happy Father's Day to all the fathers, past, present, and future.
And father figures in people's lives, you deserve a fantastic day. And our very own Paul Goodlow, he took the day off. I imagine he's on the golf course right now.
Oh, man,
or at least,
I know.
Actually, I'm looking at the time. I hope he's getting close to being done because it's hot. Well, let's slide right Bahamas and one in the Gulf. So we want to start, actually, if we can get my graphics on Max 43, there we go. We want to start near the Bahamas, where we have a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days. Now, this is our newest area that we're watching, and there's a couple of factors here in play that are going to steer it towards the Sunshine State. We'll talk about those in a minute, but generally in the direction north of the Bahamas, Bahamas, maybe bringing some heavy rain if you have cruise plans from Miami over to the Bahamas and these areas. Keep a close eye on this. And then up towards Jacksonville, still some wiggle room if this will go to the north part of Florida or the southern part of Florida. But one of the big factors in play here is this area of high pressure that's really going to be building in. And that's what's bringing all the heat to the 95 corridor, the Northeast, New England. But it's also steering this disturbance towards Florida. And really, it's stuck under that area of high pressure. It can't go any farther to the north. So the strength of that high pressure is really going to determine whether it ends up in North Florida or South Florida or somewhere in between. Still some details to work out. These are the chances of the development into a tropical depression. And where we have these green colors, we're talking 30 to 40% chance of developing into a tropical depression. That wouldn't give it a name, but if we see development into a tropical storm, then we start to get into territory where we could be seeing our first named storm of the season if the one in the Gulf doesn't beat it. Lynette's going to talk about that in a minute. Here's the low-level spin as we see this move towards the Sunshine State. This would bring heavy rain into waterlogged areas like Miami, which, there were some surrounding areas in the Miami greater metro area that saw 20 inches of rain just last week. We don't need another drop, and this could spell danger for a lot of us in South Florida. Jacksonville could be seeing heavy rain, as well as South Georgia, maybe even the panhandle of Florida, depending on the direction this takes as it moves inland. The European model showing that moderate rain along the coastline. The American model more impressed with the rain over towards Jacksonville. Still some details to work out and still a couple of days to watch this, Lynette, but another sign that the tropics are waking up. And another sign of that is this area that we're watching in the Gulf.
Yes, and this one has about a 60% chance of development. So we have to keep our eye on this.
Water and enjoy, because we don't have a lot of rain expected today on Father's Day. Monday, some scattered showers, but then we get to Tuesday. That's when the true tropical moisture starts to stream in. So today, tomorrow, yes, you'll be battling a few afternoon showers, but let me show you what's coming our way on Tuesday. Just a big influx of tropical moisture, and once it starts raining in Houston, Galveston, Conroe, over to Liberty, Beaumont, the I-10 corridor, it's going to be raining for the better part of Tuesday. We get to Tuesday night, it's still moving in. Wednesday morning, we still have storms and showers and downpours, but those are moving farther inland. Big differences in our models still. This is what Lynette was talking about, and I want to zoom in specifically to the Houston area because we know how easily Houston floods with all the rivers, creeks, and bayous and all the waterways that are around the Houston area and then eventually have to flow into the Gulf of Mexico. It takes some time, right? 3 to 5 inches of rain. This is for the European model, 5 to 8 closer to the coastline and just south of the Freeport area. But the American model is showing a completely different solution. The truth probably lies somewhere between, but I will say this, is that the American model was right about what happened in Florida. It was spitting out enormous totals last weekend. And what did we end up with in Florida? Enormous totals. That's something to watch very closely. Now, New Orleans, you're going to see several rounds of thunderstorms as we go throughout today, as we go throughout tomorrow. Most of this really intense tropical moisture from this system that's trying to develop in the Gulf is going to stay just to your west. But that still doesn't mean that we won't see activity in New Orleans. It is summertime after all, and we can see flooding from just a typical afternoon thunderstorm and several rounds of it in the New Orleans area. But you can see the focus of that moisture really pointed to the west of New Orleans. 2 to 3 inches of rain, perhaps. That's the European model, about the same as we're looking at the American model. So at least an agreement in a place like New Orleans. Now let's head to Lake Charles, the I-10 corridor. It's going to be a rough week traveling on the I-10 corridor from Lake Charles into the Houston area. It's going to be a lot of rain, a lot of slowdowns, maybe some hydroplaning. So be very careful driving. Give yourself lots of extra time and a lot of distance between you and the car in front of you if you are having to drive in one of these really intense downpours. This is where the models are quite in agreement again. So we have the European model, lower amounts, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 inches of rain. The American model starts to up those amounts a little bit, especially in the Lake Charles area and down towards Cameron and parts of the coastline. Lynette?
All right, Molly, let's talk about
weather anticipated for the upcoming week, starting today, tomorrow, and then again on Tuesday. And you'll notice it's the same areas for multiple days. There's a reason for that. It's the pattern that we're stuck in. So we have the high pressure. We know how strong that is in the south. We know it's been building in. It's going to continue to gain strength as the heat and humidity builds. But also the jet stream is, farther to the north. So we have this area that's kind of hanging out closer to the Canadian border. Very typical for this time of year to see the jet stream in this location. but it doesn't make it any easier, right, to stomach the fact that we have multiple days of severe weather on the way, and we see those storms ride up and over the ridge like Lynette just talked about. They're called ridge riders, and we will see multiple days of severe weather in the same spots. Starting today, let's get the timing for this. Duluth, Chicago, if you have any Father's Day plans outside later in the afternoon and evening, watch out for these storms passing through. They'll be quick, but still not welcome as you're trying to celebrate Dad. And then watch this complex that tries to form in South Dakota. In fact, we're going to be watching for that all throughout the overnight hours into tomorrow morning. This is, again, not too uncommon for this time of year to see these big complexes form through the overnight hours and causes some headaches as we try to start off the next morning. But, you know, in Minneapolis and areas like Wisconsin, you might have some storms that wake you up early tomorrow morning. Heavy rain that could cause some flooding for your Monday morning commute, and lightning and thunder always a threat if you're trying to get out early and maybe walk the dog before sunrise. Let's look at the timing for us, because it's not just today. It's also Monday. It's also into Tuesday and Tuesday afternoon, redeveloping over many of the same areas. Minnesota can't catch a break as of late, down towards Nebraska and even Kansas. And with the rain lingering in the same area, flash flooding will be a concern, Lynette, as the week goes on.
All right. Thank you, Molly. Well, about 30%. And while we were sleeping last night, this developed. So you're waking up this morning and this is what we're going to be working with. And unfortunately, this could be affecting Florida once again. The last one came in from the west. This one looks like it's going to be coming in more from the east.
But it is bringing tropical moisture to the same areas. So look at Miami, as well as places like Fort Lauderdale, up towards Orlando, which didn't see as much rain, but you could see more this time around. Now, the reason that we're seeing this directed towards Florida, you've got this high pressure that's going to be to the north. That's going to cause a lot of heat in the northeast. But this area of low-level spin is going to be stuck underneath that high pressure, and it's going to be steering this directly to the west.
Right. So we're talking about the chances for tropical development. The bottom line really is it doesn't even matter if it becomes tropical or not, but there is a chance for it. Bottom line is this: tropical depression. We're looking more at this greenish yellow. So I'd say that it has more of a medium chance of becoming a tropical depression before it's all said and done.
Now, if it has a name or not, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It's, you know, you'll hear us say that so many times.
The impacts.
It's always the impacts. And this one is going to be another round of heavy rain. Let's check out the low-level spin, because it's actually looking fairly impressive with this particular model interpretation, bringing this along the Florida coastline and then maybe even into South Georgia, where we could see quite a bit of rain as well.
Exactly. So as we look over the next 7 days, we're looking at the Euro model, and we can see possibly moderate rain coming in across the area here. And then we look at the GFS model, and it looks pretty the same at this point, maybe just a little bit more
towards Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Still a lot of details to work out. Just know heavy rain is coming your way this week. And as hurricane season ramps up, officials are warning coastal residents to be prepared before a named storm.
Our partners at CBS News have more on what the National Hurricane Center says people should watch for in the forecast.
A picture of it.
You do, and you see them like after the, like you look and you're like, oh, it's a rainbow.
But I will say sometimes just enjoy it, because rainbows, depending on where the sun is facing, it doesn't last for that long.
Exactly.
So just taking it in. Well, it's half past the hour as Weekend Recharge rolls on. I'm Molly McCollum.
And I'm Lynette Charles. Paul Goodlow is enjoying Father's Day, deserving of it. June is for dads, but it's also the start of hurricane season. And right on cue, Molly, we have new developments to track.
We do. We actually get into areas that are, frankly, super saturated. I mean, southeastern Texas, how much rain have we seen since late April? We had all of the flooding in early May, and here we are in June. We're still saturated, and now we're facing potential tropical development. 60% chance of development over the next 7 days as this drifts to the north, and it's going to throw a lot of tropical moisture around this area of low pressure into areas like Lake Charles, like Galveston, like Houston, Conroe, Liberty, all these spots that really don't need any rain. Meanwhile, let's check in with what's happening near the Bahamas. A 30% chance of development as this area goes to the north and to the northwest. There's a big area of high pressure that is going to be building in way to the north, even farther north than that, really off the screen. But it's going to be around that high pressure that it's going to be steered directly into the Sunshine State. Now, exactly where the most moisture ends up, that's still to be determined by how strong that high pressure is. Could it be more towards the northern half of the Florida, or maybe the southern half of Florida? That's still yet to be determined. I want to show you a few of the models and these areas of low-level spin as both of these disturbances try to develop into something as the days go on. This area in the Gulf, This is the European model. It's showing this broad area of low pressure, not really organizing all that much, still bringing a ton of tropical moisture, but not a lot of organization. Meanwhile, the European model is more excited about that area of low-level spin and taking it into Florida by Thursday, even into Friday, into areas inland like South Georgia and even Alabama. Let's look at the American model because we know, we've been talking about it all morning long, that it's spitting out huge rainfall totals in Texas. So let's look at what's happening in Texas as it brings this area of low-level spin a little bit more organized, but still rather broad when you talk about, tropical development. Still, tropical moisture, rain, flash flooding, that is our big impact from this area. And despite whether this is named or not, the impacts remain the same. Let's check out this area near the Bahamas as it spins its way into Florida. This is Thursday into Friday, so at least the timing is similar, Lynette. We like to see at least some agreement in the models, even if they're not right now agreeing on rainfall amounts.
Yes, and
floods really easily. I mean, Houston can see flooding from just a few thunderstorms, and this is just not your run-of-the-mill summer thunderstorms. Let's talk timing. Today, 2 thumbs up in Houston. I mean, it's going to be hot, but it usually is in the summertime. And we could see a few scattered showers. Same deal for Monday, but Tuesday things start to change. We see more of that tropical moisture that's streaming in. Galveston, the I-10 corridor, Beaumont, even over to Lake Charles, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it doesn't stop throughout the day on Tuesday. So we're bringing in more moisture consistently. There's no time really for the ground and some of the drainage systems to recover. And we're putting more rain on top of that. And not to mention, it's saturated in southeastern Texas. I mean, think about all the flooding we had just a month ago in early May. We haven't had a lot of time to recover from that, and now we're putting more rain on top of that. Now, New Orleans, both of the models are looking a little more optimistic for you, as you're not going to see quite as much rain, but still warrants watching as we go throughout the week, because if we see that tropical moisture start to shift back to the east, that would put New Orleans more in the zone for heavier rain, and we could easily see flooding in New Orleans just from a few training thunderstorms. Now, Lake Charles, you're in the middle of that, and you will likely see some heavier rain coming through starting on Monday evening, but even continuing throughout the day on Tuesday, with a big focus of it being just to the south and just to the west of Lake Charles. But it'll continue to move in and put rounds of rain, and it'll add up in pretty quick order for many of us in Lake Charles, but also Houston, southeastern Texas, Conroe, Liberty, many areas that have seen a lot of flooding as of late. Now down to the Corpus Christi area and Brownsville, where it has been roasting hot as of late. We're going to see some showers, which of course will help cool us down, but most of the rain is going to be just to your north. This is very similar to what we were seeing in New Orleans, where it warrants watching, also warrants watching in Mobile, but you're a lot further east to this tropical moisture than, say, in a place like New Orleans. Lynette, out there, the heat is on in the lower 48, where we're escaping the heat for now. Boston, but your days are numbered. We will be into the 90s in very short order. Washington, D.C., we're close today, and plenty of 90s across the southeast, the desert southwest, the mid-south, the plains, and even Chicago, all the way up to 93 today. Now, there are a few spots that we could see some pop-up thunderstorms that bubble up in the heat of the day, especially in parts of the plains and over towards maybe even Duluth and Chicago by this evening. But as a whole, traveling for Father's Day, I think we're going to be doing just fine at many of our major airports as far as any weather-related delays go. Let's talk about the boys of summer. If you're taking dad to the ballpark this evening, Fenway Park, Boston, my goodness, what an incredible forecast for an incredible game. And we've got a big rivalry here. You have the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. First pitch, 7 p.m. We're already in the upper 60s. It's going to stay perfect throughout the remainder of the game. So hopefully, if Dad is a big baseball fan, he enjoys that game and the weather this evening, too. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, it's a little bit warmer. We're towards 90 in the afternoon. A little bit of a breeze, but not too much to cool you down out there. And speaking of the heat, Atlanta, Truist Park, first pitch is at 1:35, and that is going to take the game through the hottest part of the afternoon as we watch the Atlanta Braves take on the Tampa Bay Rays. Lynette, that is a scorcher right there in Atlanta.
It is. I'm going to watch that from the comfort of my...
We can recharge. Happy Father's Day. I'm meteorologist Molly McCollum.
And I'm meteorologist Lynette Charles. And America's Father's Day weekend depends on the weather. And I want to give out a shout out to all the fathers out there, past, present, and future. My father's passed, but he was one of the greats.
I might be a little bit biased, but my husband is a great dad. My dad is a great dad.
I get it.
Happy Father's Day to everyone out there, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. We want to take you right to our Sunday snapshot, starting with the heat. Ooh. Development over the next 7 days or so, and that would take it eventually over the Bahamas. If you have cruise plans, watch out. And then eventually into the Atlantic side of Florida, which we know Miami and surrounding points are extremely waterlogged. Now, there's a reason it's going to take this direction. Now, I know storms typically do take this direction from the east to the west when we're talking about the tropics, but we've got a few more factors here in play. This area of high pressure being one of those big factors, and it's going to keep this area of disturbance around this high pressure. So that's going to take it right into areas like Florida. Now, depending on the strength of this high pressure, could we see this area go a little bit towards northern Florida, or will it be southern Florida? Really, it's going to be the strength of that high that's going to determine if it goes like this or if it goes more like this. That's still yet to be determined as we see this develop slowly over the next few days. And if we see it develop at all into a named system, it doesn't matter. The impacts are going to be exactly the same. These are the chances for the formation into a tropical depression. What you see in these green colors, it's about a 30 to 40% chance. That would not give it a name, but if we see this develop into a tropical storm, that would. Once again, doesn't change the impacts. Heavy tropical downpours and flash flooding, because think about how saturated Miami is. Think about how saturated places around Orlando are right now. You didn't see quite as much rain as Miami last week, but you still saw rain. This particular model wants to take it into Jacksonville, and that's the European model, but things can change because we haven't even seen this area develop yet. And that's when the models have the most trouble kind of trying to figure out, okay, how strong is this exactly going to become? The European model, it shows a pretty wet picture for areas like coastal Georgia down through areas like Jacksonville and Miami. But you flip it over to the American model and it paints a lot soggier of a picture for a place like Jacksonville. That's something to keep a close eye on. Here's how saturated we've been for the past 7 days alone. A few spots, 18 to 20 inches of rain. So, if this were to move towards Jacksonville, that would be a slightly better scenario if we're talking purely about rain, as opposed to Miami, where we've seen more than enough.
Yeah, too much rain there. And then we're also tracking what's happening about to be in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's something that we definitely have to
work its way into a place like Biloxi, Mobile, New Orleans, and of course, Houston. Now, Houston, I think, is going to be the focus of most of this disturbance that Lynette was talking about. Could it become a tropical system or not? It does not matter. We're going to see rain either way. And the rain, we're good today. Great for Father's Day plans. Tomorrow, more showers in the afternoon. Very classic summertime in Houston. Then we kind of ramp it up a notch when we bring all this tropical moisture in starting on Tuesday. And once it starts raining, we have to get out of this tropical moisture to see any kind of relief. And by Tuesday evening, still extremely heavy rain. Houston, the Woodlands, Conroe, Liberty, which have seen more than enough rain as of late. We go back to late April, early May. That's when we had a lot of that devastating flooding across the greater Houston area, especially just north of downtown. We could see more of that if some of this comes to fruition. Now, this is the European model, and it shows 3 to 5 inches of rain just south of Houston for Galveston, a little bit farther to the south, just south of Freeport, maybe even 5 to 8. But the American model, totally different solution. So right now we're seeing some big disagreements on the intensity of some of this tropical moisture. But I will say this. We had a very similar situation in Florida last week, and the European model was very conservative. The American model was throwing out these huge totals. And who was right? It was the American model. So we'll have to see how things unfold. But of course, this solution right here would paint a very dangerous situation for flash flooding in the greater Houston area. New Orleans, you have tropical rain today. You have downpours moving in. Now we can see flooding in New Orleans in just typical afternoon thunderstorm. And we're going to see several of those Monday. But when we get into Tuesday, when all of that tropical moisture is moving into Texas from what could be a system, maybe not, we're going to be watching that. That stays to the west of New Orleans, and so that keeps us out of the extremely heavy rain that even puts focus on Lake Charles as well. So the differences in the models right now, not too much in the New Orleans area, 2 to 3 inches of rain. That's the European model. Pretty similar when we look at the American model, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so at least we'd like to see agreement there. Last stop here, I want to take you into Lake Charles, the I-10 corridor. What a mess it's going to be for you this week, traveling between New Orleans, Lake Charles, Beaumont, down to Houston. Heavy downpours moving through, the kind of downpours that are very difficult to drive through, where visibility drops, and you have to give a lot of distance between you and the car in front of you. By Wednesday morning, finally, we're out of more of this tropical moisture. Once again, differences in the models. European model on the lower end, the American model putting out higher totals. Lynette, still some details to work out, but we know that heavy rain is on the way for some of the Gulf Coast states.
Yeah, heavy rain there, but
common to see severe weather in this part of the country this time of year, but it's the repeated rounds. We have some serious severe weather fatigue. Now, the setup is important to see where the storms will be forming, the storm track. And we have this big area of high pressure. That's the heat that Lynette was just talking about. But just north of that, that's where you have the jet stream, and you follow the jet stream to find the track of the storms. This is big ridge of high pressure and what we call ridge riders up and over the ridge. Those are the storms and the storm track that we're going to see as these disturbances move around and up and over this area of high pressure. And unfortunately, because the high pressure is kind of stuck in the same spot, the storms are going to be stuck in the same spot day after day. That could lead to flash flooding. Let's start with the timing today. Keep an eye on Duluth as well as Chicago. We get to around 8 o'clock. We could see some disruption of maybe some Father's Day plans in the evening. Maybe give Dad an early bedtime and just let him sleep through the storms, unless some of them get kind of feisty. Then we see overnight some storms try to develop in South Dakota. This is, once again, not too uncommon this time of year, where we see these large complexes of storms form through the overnight hours. They go upscale through the overnight hours, and by Monday morning, so tomorrow morning, 4 a.m., we have pretty feisty thunderstorms in the Twin Cities area blasting their way into Wisconsin. We've seen that play out over and over again as of late. But it's not just Monday, it's also into Tuesday, and then perhaps again on Wednesday we see more storms. And did you see some of the blue back here in the higher elevations? That's snow, yes, in June in some of the higher elevations only. Otherwise, it's going to be rain and some very hot temperatures when you look just south of that ridge. Now, 2 to 3 inches of rain, that is a broad brush in those darker green colors. But, Lynette, it's very likely that we see isolated spots with more.
All right, Molly, thank you.
In Santa Rosa say the fire season is officially here.
It is. Max Darrow from our CBS partner KPIX has a look at why fire departments are worried about this weekend.
Well, we know that, fire season, it almost seems like there's not a season anymore.
Yeah.
It's more year round. Now, thankfully, we did have a very wet winter in the West. Once again, that's 2 years in a row. But we've seen a lot of new growth with vegetation, and that can cause other problems. Let's focus on the fire, the post-fire, north of LA, north of the Gorman area on the 5. We have 11,000 acres that have been burned, and right now stands at 0% containment.
Yeah, so that's not looking good, and the weather is not going to be helping it. We're definitely dealing with those winds, the heat. Look at the forecast highs for today. So we're looking at these numbers in the triple digits around Vegas. Los Angeles coming in about 78 degrees there. But all in all, we do have dry conditions. We do have the heat out there, and we're also going to be working with low humidity as well, or high relative humidity as well. So as we continue through the rest of time, we'll see this. So we can see around Vegas very low, and that's not good. You want these numbers to be a little bit higher so we can get more moisture in there.
Another factor is the winds when it comes to tracking some of the fire danger. And when you combine the heat, the low relative humidity, and the winds, we are talking, a situation that we can see fires not only start but spread very quickly. And that's exactly what you're looking at, some of the wildfire checklist, if you will, all the conditions that you need to see, tough fire conditions. We've got them all in the Southwest right now.
Yeah, we do. And we can see as we go towards tomorrow, not much change. We're still going to be dealing with the heat. That goes into your Tuesday as well. Numbers, triple digits in a lot of spots, and Wednesday more of the same. So, it's kind of like you're just pushing repeat.
It really is. So, being very careful of the fire danger, making sure that any fires that accidentally might start, you try to contain them as quickly as possible before they race out of control, because we have the conditions for that to happen. Well, we're approaching the bottom of the rolls on. I'm Molly McCollum.
And I'm Lynette Charles. Paul Goodlow is enjoying Father's Day off, and June we know is for dads. It's also the start of hurricane season, and right on cue, we have some development.
We do. We have one area in the Gulf, one that is by the Bahamas, and the area in the Gulf could end up impacting Houston. It's already waterlogged.
Yes, so we're going to
and it's really kind of come alive over the past couple of days. But we actually have 3 areas in total when you take into account the East Pacific. So there you go. Let me get the drawing. 1, 2, 3. But I want to focus on the areas in the Atlantic Basin because these are the ones that have the greater chance of impacting the lower 48. Starting in the Gulf, 60% chance of development over the next 7 days. This is going to stream tropical moisture into areas like Houston, Galveston, Lake Charles, the I-10 corridor. And it's not like southeastern Texas has been dry. No, you go back to April and May, and we had really intense flooding in the Houston metro area. We could see more if some of these models come to fruition. We'll get into the details in a minute, but first I want to take you over to the Bahamas, where we have a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days as well, as this generally moves towards the west, towards the Sunshine State. Now, there's one factor that's driving it towards the Sunshine State, and that's the fact that there's this big area of high pressure. We'll draw it right there. It's actually a little bit farther to the north. That's going to take this area of spin, and it's going to drive it into Florida. That's the area in the Atlantic. But I want to focus on the Gulf and the Atlantic simultaneously. Talking about the Gulf first, you have this really broad area of low pressure. It doesn't, at least the European model is not too excited about developing that into something more organized. Meanwhile, it's a lot more excited about that area over towards the Bahamas. Doesn't matter if either of these get a name or not. Both of the impacts are going to be exactly the same. And that is the fact that we are expecting tropical heavy rain and potentially flash flooding. Let's look at the American model because it's a little bit more impressed with some of the spin in this area of the Gulf. It still doesn't develop it into anything per se, especially anything that could be organized and a named system. Still yet to be seen. But it's also an agreement of bringing this area of organization and low-level spin a little bit more oomph as it moves into Florida. So we're talking Jacksonville, the timing between the European and the American model, very similar. So at least we like to see that agreement. But also, we talk a lot about Florida when we talk about this area, but also South Georgia, maybe South Alabama could be seeing some heavy rain and some flooding as we get into the later half of the week. Lynette, bottom line, the tropics are coming alive. We know that there's going to be flash flooding both in Texas, potentially in Florida as well. And we still have plenty of time to watch this. Whether it gets a name or not, it does not matter.
It does not matter.
A concerning number of tornadoes this season. More than 500 have been spotted in the U.S. just since April.
And there's new evidence that Tornado Alley may be expanding beyond the Midwest. CBS News national correspondent Dave Malkoff shows us why. Well, we're still seeing, across the middle of the nation, the tornadoes happening, but that trend is going down. So basically what you're seeing here in the yellow, the trend's going down, and east of the Mississippi, the trend's going up.
And the big trend when you see, east of the Mississippi is that a lot of these tornadoes are happening after dark. And that's a big problem.
That is a big problem. Let's talk about in terms of since 2010. So we look at 2011. That was that big tornado outbreak. And so we're second to that this year.
Just this year.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're not done with this year.
Yes, that's disturbing.
It is. And the numbers keep climbing in a lot of states like Texas. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the size of the state of Texas, why you have so many tornado reports. But it's also been an active year. But you go over towards Nebraska, we're close to 100 tornado reports. Places like Iowa and Missouri and over towards the Ohio Valley, it has been an incredibly devastating year for tornadoes and severe weather.
Yeah, and you look at the records that we set in Ohio and also places like West Virginia. So it just goes to show you, again, how far north, how far east that it is going.
These are the tornado reports for both April and May. You see how many of those dates of the month were either above average or even well above average. We saw way too many of those days.
Exactly. And so now we're in June, and we can see on the 5th of this month, that's when we've been dealing with the most those reports well above. But again, we still have a lot to go left.
We do. And the pattern remains very active for many of these very same areas. Well, more weekend recharge is coming your way. Temperatures are soaring out there. The heat is on in the lower 48, where we're escaping the heat for now. Boston, but your days are numbered. We will be into the 90s in very short order. Washington, D.C., we're close today, and plenty of 90s across the southeast, the desert southwest, the mid-south, the plains, and even Chicago, all the way up to 93 today. Now, there are a few spots that we could see some pop-up thunderstorms that bubble up in the heat of the day, especially in parts of the plains and over towards maybe even Duluth and Chicago by this evening. But as a whole, traveling for Father's Day, I think we're going to be doing just fine at many of our major airports as far as any weather-related delays go. Let's talk about the boys of summer. If you're taking Dad to the ballpark this evening, Fenway Park, Boston, my goodness, what an incredible forecast for an incredible game. And we've got a big rivalry here. You have the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. First pitch, 7 p.m. We're already in the upper 60s. It's going to stay perfect throughout the remainder of the game. So hopefully, if Dad is a big baseball fan, he enjoys that game and the weather this evening, too. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, it's a little bit warmer. We're towards 90 in the afternoon. A little bit of a breeze, but not too much to cool you down out there. And speaking of the heat, Atlanta, Truist Park, first pitch is at 1:35, and that is going to take the game through the hottest part of the afternoon as we watch the Atlanta Braves take on the Tampa Bay Rays. Lynette, that is a scorcher right there in Atlanta.
It is. I'm going to watch that from the comfort of my